This podcast is sponsored by PACs. Whether on water, on land or in the air, PACs bags are both versatile and flexible backpacks that are perfectly suitable for your requirements in the most demanding of environments. PACs bags are highly regarded due to their exceptional performance in pre-hospital and in critical care environments. Renowned for their durability, they endure harsh conditions while providing rapid and reliable access to essential kit. So their well-organised compartments and customisable configurations enhance efficiency in high-stress situations. PACs bags are designed with infection control in mind and are easy to clean and disinfect. Their highly visible colours and reflective strips add quick identification and adherence to quality standards, assuring reliability. The versatility of PACs bags caters to a diverse EMS providers, but also delivers vital equipment and durability and ease of use for pre-hospital critical care services globally. I've used PACs bags in a number of critical care situations and they're absolutely excellent. Please see the show notes for further details. This episode is sponsored by the International Critical Care Paramedic Group. So the ICCPG unites regions worldwide to enhance paramedicine through global knowledge sharing and improved communication amongst critical care paramedics. So following the success of their inaugural 2022 conference, which gathered over 600 paramedics from across the globe, the ICCPG is thrilled to announce their second conference on January 30th, 2025. So the first event, hosted by the UK College of Paramedics, featured speakers from the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada and South America, discussing the vital role and unique challenges of paramedics in their regions. So the 2025 conference aims to bring together paramedic professionals worldwide, exploring topics including case studies, followed by in-depth discussions on clinical, training, leadership or research aspects. So don't miss this chance to connect with peers, learn from international experts and advance global paramedicine. So mark it in your calendars for the 30th of January 2025 and stay tuned for more details about this online event. For more information, please head over to the show notes. This podcast is sponsored by the University of Hertfordshire. So the University of Hertfordshire offers a post-registration MSc in advanced paramedic practice. This is designed for flexible part-time study with some online modules available as well. So students can choose from two specialist pathways, that's of primary and urgent care or indeed emergency and critical care. Additionally, the programme includes modules in allied health areas such as leadership, coaching and independent prescribing. The course is taught by expert, research-active staff with national and international profiles, ensuring students receive cutting-edge knowledge and practices. So innovative teaching methods include online resources, virtual reality and advanced simulation kits, enhancing the learning experience. So the staff have over 25 years of heritage and the programme has a strong reputation and a proven track record of success. Graduates enjoy excellent career prospects supported by the university's robust professional network and industry connections. So opportunities for further academic advancement are available through the Masters by Research and PhD. This course is open to anyone who's wanting to advance their careers and contribute to the field of paramedic science. Please see the show notes for further details.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
In this episode, we're going to speak about workplace culture, and to do so, I'm joined by Carl Betts. So what I wanted to do in the episode is really do a deep dive into organisational culture within the ambulance service. Just look at some of the benefits, some of the challenges as well, and also just look at some of the ways in which we could reframe and review the way we operate both on a day-to-day basis and some of the mindsets as well. Some of the other topics we discuss within the episode include looking at the unique organisational culture in the ambulance service and some of the stresses and strains which individuals are really privy to on a day-to-day basis. We also look at metrics and KPIs and the advantages and disadvantages of KPIs within pre-hospital care. We also look at company values, so mission statements and values within the ambulance service, whether they are lived out on a day-to-day basis and the advantage, disadvantage and how we could maybe live them out better. We also look at the high-stress nature of pre-hospital care, shift work, rotating patterns and fatigue, and how we can maybe combat that. We also look at the longevity of pre-hospital care and some of the ways in which we could maybe bring and foster different skills out of individuals over the longevity of their career. We also talk about talent and redefining talent and top talent, and Carl gives us some fantastic insights into his thoughts on how we redefine talent. We also look at continuous learning and professional development and how that can be fostered within an ambulance service culture. So I really do hope you enjoy this conversation. I always find Carl to be a voice of reason and sensibility. And so hopefully you find the conversation both informative and insightful, but please do give us your feedback. We will be having more conversations like this, especially on topics like culture, which are so important across pre-hospital care. Okay, please do enjoy. Welcome, Carl, to the podcast.
Thanks, John.
It's good to have you with us. Carl, just I suppose to kick off, really, culture is such a fundamental part of any workplace environment. Could you maybe speak to initially just some of the key differences that you see, really, and then I'll chip in afterwards, but just the key differences between the organisational culture, between an ambulance service and indeed the private industry?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges for an ambulance sector is the fact that when ambulance crews go out and about on their vehicles or on their ambulances, they're their own bosses at that point. And because of the geographical systems within the different ambulance services in the UK, we cover big areas, and therefore if you have a central headquarters, there are members of staff who've probably never ever set foot in that central headquarters. And when you talk about an organisational culture is really easier to manage and maintain when everybody is in the same location or within the same place or within at least the same sort of same remits. But the ambulance sector geographically is so widely spread. Within them geographical sectors, you've got different cultures in its own individual areas, whether that be personality cultures or whether it be religious cultures or ethnicity cultures. So you've got all of these different things that play together, and that's one of the biggest challenges I think for the ambulance sector, is the fact that it's a really big system that people are very, very rarely together within the system. In fact, I'd say pre-hospitally, the only time people are really together in current climates is sadly when they're sat at a hospital waiting to hand patients over. And, is that necessarily conducive to a positive time for that crew who don't particularly like sitting around, don't particularly like waiting for these things to happen? But this is part of the bigger pressure system within the system at the moment. So yeah, culturally, I think it's really difficult for the ambulance sector to have a really, really sort of like perfect, if we're going to talk about a perfect culture, just because geographically they're so big, and it's very rare that multiple groups of people come together.
I would agree with that. And like you said, the disseminated and disparate elements of pre-hospital care is that you're right, it's quite fractured over different shift patterns and quite autonomous. And like you said, the coming togetherness is actually quite absent and quite rare actually, because of the fact, like you said, it's a disseminated workforce. It's day and night, so 24/7. You are quite autonomous, and actually the only semblance of togetherness you have is maybe at the start and end of shift, where you may or may not see other crews. You may or may not see ambulance managers or otherwise, and or the only other time is, like you said, at hospital, where you get to see other colleagues just in passing. But it is fractured, and actually it's hard to almost sometimes feel as part of a big organizational culture when it is so fractured on a daily basis. I mean, archetypally and fundamentally, I think it's an ambulatory role, and I guess what I'm trying to notion towards is you're constantly moving within an ambulance system as an ambulance crew. You're constantly on the move, and if I'm being really honest, my transition into becoming part of the commercial sector in a number of different multinational companies is actually staying still. And actually, but the advantages of that is you do feel organizational culture in a different way, because you're part of it and you're immersed in it. And there is a semblance of day-to-day continuity in that role, where you can be interacting with colleagues, interacting with bosses, and then there's also this almost social aspect of everyone finishes work at some kind of reasonable time, so you can converse together, you can have dinner together on business meals afterwards, and there is the coming togetherness, and I think that is and that always has been a real challenge for ambulance services, and actually does affect culture actually in fundamentally.
It absolutely does, because what happens is you end up with micro cultures within the greater culture, and some of them micro cultures, for whatever reason, aren't as healthy as others, and that can be for a myriad of reasons. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying, because now I'm sort of predominantly more non-shift based. Is that thing about a team coming together, sharing cups of tea at regular intervals while you're having discussions about the work that you're doing, finishing on time, and going home all together, and all walking out at the car park together. You've got that sort of unified feel. And the difficulty with the ambulance sector is, like you said, it's ambulatory. We're never going to get everybody finishing at the same time. You're never going to be able to get everybody's meals at the same time. When I used to work on a car, you'd come back for your meal at 1 o'clock in the morning, and you might be the only one there. And actually, you just sit there on your own for another half an hour, and then you go out on another job again. When in fact, at that time of night, you might just want someone just to have a quick chat to, just to perk yourself up again for the rest of the shift. But these are the challenges that you're never ever going to get away from. And if we want to get away from them, you're just not going to, because it is going to be 24/7, like it or lump it, because we work with patients who are poorly 24/7. We have to respond. We have to do our job. However, if you want a positive culture and you want a lot of positivity within the workplace, there has to be something to happen to make that happen. And if you have a negative culture in a particular workplace, then unless you do something to change that, you're never make inroads. And the issue you've got is how you go about doing that. And when you've got services that stretch beyond breaking point, everybody's really tired. People are slightly disillusioned. People have their own little microcosm on the ambulance, and that's their little bubble. And the wider ambulance service isn't really in their forethought of the mind, because they're just in their little bubble at that time. People have to be given the time to allow that time together to form the culture. And I'm sort of reflecting now while I'm thinking, is that although COVID was a horrible time for so many reasons, in terms of me as a clinician on the ambulance at the time, we had a lot more crews on the road. We had a lot more downtime because we weren't going to, or it didn't feel like we were going to, as many jobs. And therefore, we were all in it together. And the culture at that point, we're here, we're all in this, we're all doing this, we're all getting on with it. And actually, there was a lot of good conversations happened. There was a lot of good, healthy, laughter happened. There was a lot of sharing of things happening. And actually, in terms of certain parts of the culture, that was really interesting. And I actually enjoyed seeing my colleagues. And what I was hoping was when the COVID pandemic eased and ceased, we might be able to keep some of that. But sadly, now we've gone back to situation normal, as it were, and the pressure's gone through the roof. We're back to where we were. That time together has sort of stopped again, and that's really kind of quite sad in a way, because it can be quite a lonely world in the ambulance world, because you are just out and about with your crewmate. And I used to know that on the car when I was lone responding, which I absolutely loved. But it can be lonely.
Yeah,
and actually you need that togetherness.
I agree, Carl. Part of the critical care scheme I was part of for a long time just had a 10-year reunion, and it was fantastic to see colleagues. And I really both respect and value their input, and I learned a lot from them, actually. It was really interesting at the 10-year reunion. I had a moment, actually, when there were some awards being given out, and just thought that actually I didn't journey and do this job together with other people. I did it I felt quite on my own, and I think that's probably everyone else's experience as well, because they're a single critical care resource supporting the wider ambulance service, but you're not doing it with colleagues necessarily. You're doing it on your own, and the critical care scheme is fantastic. I probably grew the most I've ever done in that time, and got some fundamental respect for colleagues. But the overwhelming feeling was, it was quite a lonely time actually, and it was quite an isolated time. The enduring memory I had was driving through the streets of London on my own at 3-4 a.m. in the morning, waiting for the next call or incident, and then doing that in a flash team perspective, but not necessarily. But you're not journeying together. There's no that coming togetherness outside of clinical governance, which was fantastic, and a few other socials, I think that was front of mind, the acutely aware that there is this disparate working, and it is a unique environment where it's so hard to feel the culture because there's such a high level of autonomy, which is not dissimilar to other emergency services such as the police, maybe different again with the fire service. I really, and maybe to your thoughts, there is a lot more team working within the fire service. Everyone's going out together. The fire truck is huge, so it's got 5 or more colleagues on it. So there's this team working consistently, which is very different actually to pre-hospital care. Could we maybe pivot and look at the staff support, because that brings its own issues with it? Carl, could you maybe speak to how the ambulance service, from a cultural perspective, has changed over the past few years to try and support staff? Because I do feel there has been more support mechanisms put in place because of this fundamental acknowledgement that it is quite a lonely place. Could you maybe speak to that?
I think mental health awareness now is just rightly so high on everybody's agenda, because it does affect everybody at some point in time, some more severe than others. But at the end of the day, we all have good days and we all have bad days. Now, I think that the issue with the ambulance sector is it's very easy just to put yourself in your cab and just get on with it and get on with it and get on with it and get on with it until something happens, and then you can't get on with it anymore. I've talked to you about it before, Owen. My analogy is my filing cabinet, this chaotic filing cabinet that unless I do something to organise it at some point, it's not going to be able to shut, or when I open it, it's just going to burst out and it's going to scare the living daylights out of me. Now, the big thing about it is there's lots of options, there's lots of charitable options to get mental health support within the ambulance sector. But I think one of the crucial things is the ambulance sector is now accepting the fact that the ambulance work does and can hurt people. It's been proven to hurt people, and it's been proven to hurt people significantly. And it's not just hurting the person directly. It then has an impact on the loved ones. It then has an impact on the family. And also it then has an impact on the patient, because when we've got levels of burnout that are as, significantly high, if that person isn't at work, then they're not being looked after because they're isolated wherever they are, potentially away from the family that understands them, which is the Green family. We understand each other. And actually, unless you've been a part of it, there's certain things that you don't and will struggle to understand. But the key thing is because more people are aware of it now, people look out for each other more, and it's now a much more accepted thing. And I'm not saying we've got it right. I'm not saying we're there yet, but it's much more accepted to say, just going to have a quiet word with you, as in a team leader or a manager or whatever, just to say, look, I'm really worried about that person. We've got to start keeping an eye on them. And that, I think, is now not a thing to be afraid of doing. It's a thing to actually acknowledge, and actually having them open discussions with the actual person and just say, you know what, mate, I heard you went to a pretty rough job the other day. Are you definitely all right? Do you need anything? One thing that we struggle with is we accept it when people go off ill with mental health problems, for instance. But actually, what we should have done, or what we could have done, was just give them some downtime before that happened. And I think the problem when systems are working at breaking point and money is so tight and resources are so tight is that people haven't got that ability to have an out. And I have it in my mind that before I came to the ambulance sector and before I became a paramedic, I was Carl who'd done lots of other things. And actually, if we can understand people as people on a holistic setting, if you, Owen, happen to be a really good mechanic and you chose to leave that profession and chose to come into the ambulance world, actually, you know what? We use vehicles that need mending regularly because absolutely we break them a lot. Well, instead of you going off sick, go into fleet for a couple of months. You know what? If you used to work in finance, right, we're going to pay you anyway. Why don't we just have a breather somewhere else? And it's making them transitions really easy. But when we're sort of really struggling, people are pushed and pushed and pushed until they then go off sick. And then actually it's a no-win for anybody at that point because everybody suffers for it.
I agree, and I think something you said about just transition and mobility within the service, and acknowledging, like you said, it's actually it's multifactorial. Like you said, it's high acuity interspersed with a lot of low acuity work out on the front lines, and those high acuity jobs, which are extremely difficult because it's you have to be proficient with adults and pediatrics. There's no subspecialism. You're not necessarily a subspecialist in mental health or a subspecialist in geriatric care. It's everything coming at you. And one of those high acuity pediatric or indeed maternal jobs or incidents can absolutely take you out, Carl, to your earlier point. There's some horrendous incidents that can occur with minimal training, but also another layer on top of that, and something which is yet to come to the ambulance service, which is coming, is fatigue management and this FRMS, so this fatigue risk management scoring, because another layer is actually not sleeping well. A lot of people, a lot of frontline paramedics and EMS and FEM doctors really struggle with shift work, really struggle with night shifts, late shifts, early shifts, weekend shifts, and actually getting enough sleep to then think coherently, act safely. And actually what we don't necessarily do at the moment is risk score, to and then mitigate according to that fatigue score, because it's once you uncover it's the tip of the iceberg. Once you uncover it, and they do it in aviation actually, around fatigue scoring and risk management strategies according to fatigue, because that again not only affects decision making but affects the mental filing cabinet, because your capacity, we were talking offline about range, and your range every day according to your own children can change depending on your fatigue, and actually your range at work, the range of the patience you have with patients, with colleagues, with yourself, changes according to your fatigue levels, and actually therefore your flexibility and your resilience changes on a daily basis, and actually adds another level of complexity which isn't necessarily being managed or indeed confronted or measured by the ambulance service right now. It's a real personal thing, but if you manage it poorly, your resilience and your capacity to be at work is absolutely minimal.
Yeah, and I really agree with that. And the one thing that I find very interesting about this is you have to appreciate the people who are sort of planning these shifts, the people who know the shift patterns that need to happen to make the service run. They are not personally looking out at somebody and saying, right, I'm going to give them the most shocking run of shifts ever. It doesn't happen. And this is where you've got the difficulty between a service needing to actually function and looking after the colleagues who work within it. And this is where we've got this real clash of crossover of the fact that we have to deliver a service, but we also have to look after our people, because if we don't have our people, we don't have a service to run. And where do the two meet, and where do the two clash, and where does the friction allow? And it's sort of a multifactorial issue with this, because you could just say, well, we need more staff. But actually, do we just need more staff, or is the root cause that we're going to inappropriate or not appropriate jobs for the ambulance sector? But while the current system is in place and everybody else has got the pressures that are ongoing, we are doing what we're doing, and that's what we're dealing with. But actually, over time, with increases in sort of hear and treat on the telephone, video consultations for the all manner of jobs that come into an ambulance service, if we can lessen the demand on crews, then that will lessen the demand potentially on the hospitals, which will lessen the demand on crews waiting at hospitals, which will then potentially allow them to have some more downtime with their colleagues. And it is one of these, you've got to sort the root of the problem out, and just chucking a load more staff on isn't necessarily going to help the cause. Potentially all you're going to do is harm the cause, because you're going to harm more people. And I think that's the sort of fundamental problem that the NHS, not just the ambulance sector, the NHS as a whole, is struggling to deal with, because every part of a system in its own little process is at bursting point. So therefore there's no giving it. Everybody's given all they've got, and they're giving more than what they've got. And that's where the fundamental issues, and that's where my role in improvement is really sort of key. I see it, because we have to accept there's an awful lot of waste in the NHS. There's lots of processes that are really sort of complex that can be really stripped out and leaned out. However, it comes back to the culture of the organisation to either allow or want that to happen. And that's where my world and the culture world sort of crossover as well. So there's lots of crossovers between lots of different things, and all of them are as important as each other.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And Carl, to be honest, one of the things you're saying there, which is a seminal point actually, is about caring for the carers and actually caring for frontline staff and putting things on, initiatives, systems, schemes on for staff, free or reduced entry to gyms if that's something people want to engage with, food tokens, but just doing everything you can to lessen some of the burden of rotating shifts, of this incremental workload, which is not slowing down, with this kind of fractured work culture, and also, like you said, what can be really difficult and really challenging is incidents where colleagues don't necessarily feel prepared or indeed trained to go to an overwhelming primary care demand. So there's a couple of things there, like you said, caring for the carers, lots of different schemes to support them, upstream triage to really start to segment some of this work. So you're right, 9 times out of 10 crews are not going to these incidents, which actually can be managed by a pharmacy or managed by a GP or an advanced practitioner in a GP surgery. So upstream triage, and actually starting to look at where the allocation of resources is sitting to lessen the blow, really. And I agree with everything you say. So one of the things, so those are some key points actually, and you're right, the real drive now is to acknowledgement of how difficult the job is over the longevity of time. Look at the fruition of where we've come from the past, because the past, in order to understand the future, you have to look at the past and look at, like you said, how damaging the role can be, not always is, but can be, from a PTSD perspective, also a fatigue, a gross fatigue perspective, and indeed just a longevity of service, just physically on your back, on your joints, on your legs, and then on your tiredness, on your fatigue. But so just pivoting for a second, Carl, and I'll pose this to you and bounce it back if you want to. What we've seen in the past few years is a real meld or a real integration of commercial or private sector into the ambulance service. And what I mean by that is KPIs is really compliance, because compliance really is and was a private sector issue, and has bled into public services. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's definitely something. KPIs has definitely been a central theme of, and metrics have been a theme. Digital dashboards have been a theme of public sector work, and indeed hospital care. Could you maybe speak to, and what's your perspective on, do these performance metrics really add to patient care in your thoughts, or do they detract from it?
No, I think it's really interesting because when you talk about KPIs, KPIs are effectively, they're an assurance standard. That's what they are. You aim to hit the standard, but actually, if you're a trustworthy soul, that should be the absolute base level that you should be aiming for, and absolutely you should be aiming for a higher percentage of the KPI, and that's where the improvement side of it comes in. That if you had a RAG rating, if you're hitting the KPI, brilliant, you're green, happy days. But unless you're constantly looking at that, you won't notice when you're trending downhill until it goes orange, or until you have a really deep dive and it goes red. And KPIs are effectively an outcome measure, and unless you change something downstream of that within the processes, the outcome's never going to change because it's an outcome. If I have to get to patients in 7 minutes, well, brilliant. If I don't do anything about it, I'm not going to get there in 7 minutes. If I don't make an intervention further down or change processes and change systems, the outcome measure is always going to be there. It's not going to change. And it's about that fundamental understanding of your own systems. So yes, KPIs offer a level to say, you know, this is where we are. CQC offers a level. It says you're good. It says you're struggling, or it says you're excellent. That gives you a performance bar. But actually, that's a piece of information and a piece of intelligence that you can either use to your advantage or just ignore. And actually, you know, if you use it and you say, yes, okay, happy days, yeah, we're good, but we're not excellent. So how are we going to get to excellent? Because good's not good enough. You know, and it's that understanding of, yes, they're good, but just saying, well, we haven't hit that KPI, that's not helpful. Because the key point to note is, right, we haven't hit that KPI, what is going on? And then when you're talking about the data dashboards and the intelligence dashboards, the NHS, the amount of data lines that the NHS actually holds and actually collects is phenomenal. The question is what you're doing with it. It's all right having all this data, but unless you're getting it for a specific purpose, for a specific rationale and for a specific need, it's meaningless. And that is the difficult part of understanding. We haven't met this KPI. Okay, we need to do some root cause analysis to find out what the issues are as to why we're not. And then we need to do some interventional work, or the teams need to do some interventional work to make a change to the process to see what the outcome change is, which is the KPI meet. So I think they're a real key fundamental part of how we work, but actually it's not the be all and the end all. All they are is marking your homework at that point. You know, are we doing what we need to do? And if we're not, well, we need to do something different. And that's fundamentally how it should be done. Where I think previously KPIs and AQIs had been utilised as it's the be all and end all. And yes, that is what we're measured against, but it's not the fundamental fact that you need to look at. You need to look at all the other stuff underneath it. And I think that comes to where the sort of improvement ideals come from, you know, the NHS impact thought processes, which is now well evidenced within the NHS. And improvement is, you know, running through seams of the NHS now, but it won't ever get to a tipping point unless the culture of the system wants it to happen. And if we're talking about the ambulance service, for instance, because we're an ambulatory type of work and people are out and about, and because there's no give in the system, if we need a crew or some crews to be off the road, to be given some time to make some positive change in an area that they are the experts in because they do the do, who's going to pick up the slack that they're not on the road? And therefore, and it's this real conflict of, we have to meet our demand for our patients, and it's easy just to carry on doing things not very well, for instance, but actually the hard decision is to say, right, we are going to commit to this, and we are going to commit to taking X number of resources out of this to make that change, because in the long run, the short-term hit for the long-term goal, that's where you get your win.
Yeah, listen, I agree with that. And I think, like you said, baseline data is good, and you measuring from a base, having an appreciation of baseline data, albeit, time to scene, time at scene, time at hospital, all these metrics and other metrics as well, especially clinical ones. How much, what's the compliance to pain medication? What's the compliance to two sets of observations? It's good to have that data, but as you said, it's a jumping off point. That's not necessarily a reflection of the quality of patient care at all, which is so much more multifactorial, like bedside manner, active listening, sharing a plan, all these non-technical skills which actually sit on top of baseline data, but it's equally harder to measure. But it's not the baseline data is good to do research from and to pivot from, but it's not the be all and end all of patient care.
Yeah, I think baseline data is one of your key fundamental facts, though, because unless you have your baseline data, you don't know where you're starting from. So therefore, how are you ever going to evidence that you've actually made any positive change? Or actually, just as important, whether you've tried something and it's not worked, which should just be celebrated as much as it working, because that's where you learn. If things work perfectly all the time, then I think you're living in cloud cuckoo land. And I think your data is probably not perfect, because you do have sort of anomalies every now and again, but it's important what you do with it, and that sort of reflective learning, that understanding of, we've tried this, okay, well, we thought this was going to happen and actually it hasn't. Well, why hasn't it happened? Well, it's because of this. Right, okay, we didn't consider that. Right, let's have another little go. And it's a real sort of massive change in mindset for not just the ambulance sector, but the NHS as a whole, in that something works really well, right? That term, let's roll it out, that just makes me sort of cringe and my toes curl, is because you can't just roll something out, because how do you know that it's going to work in that particular area? Just because it's worked in area A doesn't mean it's going to work in area B. And just because it's worked in hospital trust A doesn't mean it's going to work in B. But actually, the premise of it and the principle of it might be bang on. But what you have to do is then work out, right, what nuances do I need to take and what nuances do I need to make to allow that to happen? And I think that's potentially one of the slight differences in industry that's got quality improvement and sort of lean methodology running through its system, and has had it running through its system as a go-to way of working for years. They get it. So therefore, that culture, that's how they do business. The NHS is a lot further behind that. And also the NHS has a difficulty in that it's always working with people. A machine, if you want to make a change, you change something and something happens and you can replicate it. Well, we can't do that, thankfully, with human beings, because human beings, we're our own entities, and therefore, we do things slightly differently. And that has to be something that has to be factored into. So it's just really interesting in that we are wanting to change our way of working, but it's not just a way of working, it's a whole mindset thing, it's a whole cultural thing, it's a whole way that we do our business. And like I said at the very beginning, because everybody's out and about and everybody doesn't have any time to be able to do, then what you end up with then is a really slow, like glacial change. And actually what you need to have is a quick, sharp hit, bash, right, okay, let's get on with it, because this is the way we're going about our business.
Yeah, no, definitely. And a couple of things you said earlier, which is absolutely key. And just from an example perspective, initiating sports rounds, this psychological debrief, this emotional debrief, is extremely difficult when you've got a disseminated workforce. It's not the same, on a ward when you can maybe ask staff to devote 15 minutes here or 15 minutes there, but they're all on the same ward, they're all coming together. Actually, with this disseminated and disparate workforce, it's again, that's a classic. It's a good example, because it's a system and or a scheme or an initiative that works well in one work environment, but actually you translate that through to the hospital environment, and the uptake is extremely difficult because of rotating shift patterns, because of maybe desire to be in on your days off with without being paid, and other elements. So that's a classic example of one thing that works well in one sector doesn't necessarily map across. But Carl, could you maybe speak to something you mentioned there, which is really important and is fundamental to workplace culture, is mission statements and just really living out the values, company values, or ambulance service values and mission statements in shaping culture. Because there's one thing to being notional and almost giving wordplay to values and mission statements. There's another thing to absolutely living it out, and showing staff that you are living out the mission statement through action, through massive action. Could you maybe speak to that and what you've seen within the ambulance service, what you'd maybe like to see, and where we could almost get to?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, it's absolutely vital that any organisation knows where it's going, because if you don't know where you're going, you're just going to be walking around blind, really. And if you know where you're going, you've got something to aim for. And if everybody's aiming for the same thing, you've got that shared objective. And a shared objective is much more likely to work than an individual silo objective. Now, the interesting thing about mission statements is that it's not easy to write. They're not easy to put together, because it's going to determine what's going to happen over the next X number of years of the organization's life. But the even more tricky thing is the how. Is how do we do the do? How are we going to get from A to B? And when you've got such a large organization that is spread over a large geographical area, who is very rarely in one spot, how do you get all of them members of staff and colleagues and friends all on the same page? And I think the fundamental issue with moving forwards in an ambulance sector is that I think that is the key point, is because people have their own stations, have their own microcosms. An area has their own microcosm, and just because an organization's vision statement has changed, the person who's doing the do on the ground, who's going out and looking after the patient, their job hasn't changed, their role hasn't changed, their fundamental act of being a clinician on a vehicle hasn't changed. It's the DNA of the company, effectively, who they're working for, that's changed. And the how is always going to be the difficult thing. So, embedding quality improvement or embedding a new culture of working, with that is going to take some time, and with that is going to take some change of working practice, and with that is going to mean that actually we do need to empower people to do certain things, and to empower them we need to give them the time to do it. So if we're going to do it, how are we going to give them the time? And it always comes back to the how, because yes, you've got a strategy, yes, you've got X number of years to meet your strategic objectives, but you've got to know how you're going to do it, and you've got to know how you're going to measure it, because if you're not measuring it, how do you know you're getting to it? And I think that's where the quality improvement crossover really happens. But it does take time for an organisation who may well not have bought into improvement as a concept, like lots of NHS establishments. That's where the tipping point will change over time as it grows. And like we always talk about in improvement, it's not something you just do, it's a way of working. It's a mindset, it's that quizzical thought process of, well, why does that happen like that? Why on earth are we doing it like that? But actually you need the time to be able to say, right, well, this happens because of this, and this. Right, okay, well, why does that happen? Because of that. Right, how does that link with that? And then find all the pieces of the puzzle. But that takes time, and that time is something that a sector we struggle with, because we're so pressured and we're so stressed. And it's not just, like I said, the ambulance sector, it's the NHS as a whole in every department. But actually, if everybody could do a little piece of improvement, then that will make their life better, and that will make the patient's journey better. And if everybody does a little bit, before you know it, you've got a big bit. People think that improvement work is all about groundbreaking stuff. it's all about, you know what, we've got to hit the KPI. Well, no, it's not. It's about looking at a little piece of your part of the puzzle. And if you make that change there, and your mate makes that change there, and your mate makes that change there, that social connectivity around it, you know what's going to happen to your KPI? Bosch will do better. But because people see it as a big thing, you know, hanging over their head, they get lost in it. When actually it's about the fundamental bits of making small change in your area. But you have to be given the time, you have to be given the knowledge, you have to be given sort of the encouragement to say, you know what, crack on, get on and do it. And I think that's one thing that the ambulance sector has always been had difficulty with, in saying to staff, yeah, crack on. What support do you need? And I'll give you that support.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think so. So one of the things you're articulating, just looking at some of the meta themes here, Carl, is that initially it's the acknowledgement that actually pre-hospital care is difficult for a number of reasons. We've mentioned those throughout the podcast. It's difficult personally, professionally, socially. It poses a number of challenges, especially over the longevity of time. And then so the quality improvement work is to improve workflow, but there's some things in the background, and this is kind of leading me to segue into a question for you, actually. So there's been a number of initiatives, because the major pivot needs to be, right, how do we support staff better in this difficult work environment, for a number of reasons we've mentioned. One of the initiatives was freedom to speak up, so this against any bullying or indeed any harassment, and really starting to and continuing to really push freedom to speak up, so that there is no inequality and discrimination and fundamentally any bullying. But also another pivot would be looking at different support mechanisms like counselling, different support mechanisms like Schwartz rounds, whether they work or not. Pre-hospitally is another thing, but it's a lot of these kind of support mechanisms to really foster a better workplace and a better work culture to allow you to get on and care for patients. Flexible working, as you said before, you know, flexible working rotas, childcare initiatives, healthy money off gyms, or indeed leisure activities, trying to create the conditions to make it easier in what is a difficult workspace. So to create the culture of actually caring for the carer, and look, and you know, that alone, there's longevity in that, because actually if you feel like you are being cared for, it's the Richard Branson principle. If you treat your staff well, they will treat the end user well, they will treat the customer well. If you do everything you can to facilitate and support this conducive environment, so my question on the back end of that is, have you seen these initiatives? Because it's not easy. You know, we've spoken to a few of the Freedom to Speak Up champions. It's extremely hard from a number of reasons, and it is a complex environment. How has these quality improvement initiatives to support staff gone from your perspective, and how can we still leverage those to improve that caring for carers, that staff support?
Firstly, I think one of the things that you're talking about there is the quality of your local leadership. So speaking from a personal perspective here, one of my line managers a few years ago, you know, when you're talking about the flexible working agreements, when you're talking about sort of looking after your staff, absolutely, that person listened to my concerns, listened to my worries, listened to what I needed for me to function as a clinician, but also to function as a family oriented person with my young family at the time. And that line manager absolutely did everything he could to help with what I needed. And there's always going to be some give and take, you know, that's part of it. But actually, the flexible working agreement that I was then offered, you know, transformed what I was doing, absolutely transformed it. With the cost of living, where you've got the cost of childcare and things nowadays, that actually, you know, it's sometimes cheaper not to go to work by the time you've shelled out for lots of childcare things. And it's a real sort of, when you're talking about retention in the ambulance sector, if I can't afford to necessarily send my child to daycare every day, then you're going to not do the job. And then if you don't do the job, the end product is the ambulance service has just lost another qualified clinician or another qualified support worker. And I think the big thing around staff at a very, very base level is making them feel supported and making them feel important and making them feel that their voice is important, and that if they voice something, it will be listened to. And actually, as long as people are listened to and people feel like they've been genuinely listened to and it's not just had lip service paid to it, you're going to get a much more open culture. And I think once people feel that I can talk to my line manager about anything, and I know I'm safe to talk about it, and I know that the processes that the sector has in place are going to look after me, or look after my colleagues, or look after the patient for whatever reason the issue is, then the culture will automatically start changing. If you have a culture where you can't go and speak to your line manager, if you don't feel like you're going to be supported, if you don't feel like you're going to be genuinely listened to, then what that breeds is a culture where people don't talk about things, and then incidents aren't reported, things aren't taken under control, people then do get stressed because they haven't got the support they need, have lots of sickness because they've got things going on at home that actually, they just need some extra help with, that the ambulance sector or their line manager, whatever, could help with. And at the end of the day, people come to work within the ambulance service because it's a really good job. It's a really worthwhile job. It's a really satisfying job. You're working with like-minded people, but you're also a human being with a life. And in terms of modern day life is very, very busy and really complex and, multifactorial. And working for the ambulance sector is one part of it. And I think sometimes, because of the nature of the work, because of how much brain space it can take up, because of how much emotional space it can take up, it can become sort of all-encompassing, which the negative effect is on the other side thing. So I don't necessarily think being a really good team leader and having really good colleagues around and having a really good supportive leadership structure, I don't think that's a quality improvement initiative. That is a behavioural, and that is accepting what is the behaviour that we are going to accept within an organisation. And that's where your vision and your value comes in, and that's where you sort of your management system from board to floor, everybody needs to be showing the same values and showing the same sort of singing off the same song sheet as it is. And that's one of the key fundamental things. That's not a quality improvement initiative. That's just about how we as a sector look after everybody. And we have to appreciate that people in leadership have tough times as well, with the financial struggles that are going on at the moment and the sort of the spotlight that is on sort of some of these people. They're not having an easy time of it, but where's the support that they're getting? Where's the peer support that's happening there? Because, this looking after each other, it's not just one way. It's absolutely, it should flow both ways, because at the end of the day, and that's where Schwartz rounds come in, we're all just people. We just happen to wear different things on our shoulders and get paid a different wage, but we're still people.
So, Colin, just as we're coming to land on the conversation, actually, for the last 5 minutes, I just wanted to see and indeed explore how we leverage these cultural opportunities really to retain staff. So, how you leverage a good culture in a high stress environment to retain and attract top talent, One of the things we've seen in the space is ambulance services paying for MScs, paying for master's degrees, and there's been talk of at governmental level. It still, I don't think has happened, where there's bursary schemes for paramedic science degrees. That's still not the case at the moment, as I believe, but there is financial incentive to stay within the educational pathway, which seems to be something which is quite attractive to staff, because it gives that sense of personal development back to staff. And like you said, having flexible working agreements, having a leadership structure which accommodates people's complex lives is another way to retain staff and retain top talent from a cultural perspective. Or work company culture. Could you maybe speak to some others where the ambulance service could consider in order to retain and attract top talent?
Yeah, so to talk about the term top talent, Owen, I personally don't like that phrase. And the reason why I don't like it is because every member of our staff and every member, colleague, and every sort of person who works within the NHS has some top talent. What we don't do is find out what that talent is. And what we don't do is mold that talent. What we do is we say, your job is X, you do your job. And actually, it doesn't matter what job you do. Your job is vitally important to the cogs on that wheel turning. And actually, if your bit falls off, well, then the entire thing falls over. And you know what? That top talent thing, every person who I work with has the ability to have top talent. What we have to do is basically find out what is their niche, what do they like, and that's where we talk about understanding people as a human being, because they're a human being first and they're a clinician second, and sometimes we forget that and we think they're a clinician first and a human second, and it's the complete wrong way to think about it. So for me, when I'm looking after colleagues or members of staff, I want to know about them as a person. I want to know what makes them tick, because then when pieces of the work come in that need to happen, that need to be actioned, I'm giving it to the appropriate person who will, one, get something out of it, be really invested in it, really enjoy it. And you know what, like you made reference to with Richard Branson earlier on, that's how you're looking after your staff, because they feel like they're important. They're being offered the opportunity to shine. They're not just being told, come on, just come to work and do your job. Now, I appreciate there is always going to be an essence of you get paid to do a job. Absolutely, because that's how things work. But actually, we have to make sure that we understand what people can do. And it's something that we don't do very well at the minute. And we're missing a trick, because how many people work in the NHS? How much talent is there that we're not utilising because nobody can see the wood for the trees, because everybody is just snowed under and has no breathing space? And I think if we can just have that bit of breathing space to understand our people as people first and allow them to sort of express what they're really good and really passionate about, then we're on to a winner. And yes, education is important, and lots of people would absolutely buy into education pathways, but that has another knock-on effect, that we're talking about shift work's really busy. The shift work then doesn't stop unless you're on some inter-collaboration education pathway. But if you then choose to do your master's, awful lot of work then goes into a master's, which means where's that going to fit into your already very busy life? And I appreciate, people do it and people manage it, but do we do it in the most healthy way? And it all comes down to the how.
Listen, that's powerful, Carl, and it's good to reframe. And indeed, I completely accept your point, actually, and I think reframing that top talent, but and drawing talent out of each and every person, and taking the time to treat them fundamentally as human beings first, and then clinicians second, and finding their strengths is absolutely key. And I think it's a fantastic point to both end on, but also just to ruminate on, really, and how we can do, how even I can do this in my organization right now, and you yourself, and how because there is autonomy in every role, and the big lie is that people don't have autonomy when you do, because you can bring out the best in someone else, and you can also find out what their strengths are and advocate for them. So I think that's a powerful reframer actually, because actually, like you said, to harness efficiency and effectiveness, bringing out the talent in each and every person, what they are good at and what they do enjoy doing, is a powerful reframe, and to be harnessed by the ambulance service, and especially, as you were saying earlier, Carl, around, the degradation and the deterioration over time of repeating shift work, of high workloads, of physically on your back and on your body. It's sometimes, or a lot of the times, prudent to look at these pivots to see where we can use staff differently to their advantage, to the institution's advantage, because you're bringing the best out of them. Where else could you lend yourself to being useful, or indeed be flourishing in the culture, in the system, and utilizing them? But I think it's a powerful reframe, and it's something which almost needs a lot of attention within the ambulance service, because you're right, otherwise we're not harnessing people's true potential in the role.
Yeah, I think for me it's a fundamental. It's a fundamental. One thing that I sort of sometimes like to ask, fellow leaders and fellow peers, when we talk about sort of understanding the people who work for you, is, do you know 5 things about them that are nothing to do with work? And it's not a minimum of 5 things, but what I'm getting at here is there is point to prove that if you're a leader now, if you're in any line management experience, can you hand on heart say that the people who I have working under me, I know 5 things that are important to them outside of work? And it's that asking yourself that question that for me is really important, because if you understand a little bit more about your colleagues and your team as people, you will understand what they need. And if you can give them what they need to a certain extent, you will then get the best out of them, and you'll have a happy, a much more obliging group of people who, when you then need something, they'll reciprocate. And it's that two-way thing that I was talking about earlier on.
Carl, that's fantastic. And listen, a great place to leave the conversation. Thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it. We'll have more conversations, no doubt, and indeed bat around a few more contemporary issues on the podcast. But thanks for your time, Carl.
Cheers. Been great to speak to you again, Owen.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.